Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two excellent poets with us today, Elizabeth Iannaci and Lynne Bronstein. Elizabeth will read first and then Lynne. Elizabeth Iannaci is a widely published Southern California poet whose work appeared recently in Does It Have Pockets?, the San Diego Poetry Annual, Hole in the Head Review, Craddock, and various publications. She earned her MFA in poetry from VCFA and is partially sighted, which may account for her preference to paisley over polka dots. Her most recent chapbook is The Virgin Turtle Light Show, Spring 1968, from Latitude 34 Press. Her poetry is warm, loving, precise, imaginative, transformative. Here's a splendid poet and a wonderful human being, Elizabeth Iannaci.
Oh, thank you so much, Harry. That was a lovely introduction. It's just such a pleasure to be here, and it's just such a wonderful hour that you put together. It's always such a pleasure to see the poets and the combinations of poets. So I'm gonna, Cecilia Wallach always says read from the book. So I'm going to read a couple of sonnets. They're really not sonnets, they're more nonnets. From This is the Virgin Turtle Light Show, Spring 1968, which some of us were actually alive and kicking in 1968. This is, there are 18 of them. This is number 13. Raised on images, we'd watched a freckled-faced puppet amble across our 10-inch screens, watched Captain Kangaroo pull puppies out of his pockets, wanted to be or to date Annette, watched rockets carry dogs, chimps, then men into orbits. As screens and coverage grew, we viewed in living color as President Kennedy's funeral cortege passed his saluting son, watched Negro students, books clasped to their chests, escorted by troops up school steps, watched baton-swinging cops set dogs and fire hoses on marchers. We witnessed the country split open with riots blazing, leaving coils of oily smoke and rubble. Then in dorms and apartments, we watched Operation Rolling Thunder lay a carpet of napalm upon a green jungle. Now, one freak at a time, we stopped watching, talked to strangers, passed panhandled coins from one pocket to another, put a flower behind your ear, sometimes offered a place to crash or a bowl of rice to anyone with empty hands. And number 16, in Hollywood, teen runaways in granny glasses and suede were persuaded to give head as if it were currency. Boys by the Gold Cup on the boulevard in Las Palmas, girls at the Sunset Grill, they'd hustle enough to score a burger, some downs, and the $10 a night rent at Castle Argyle, where you could get the crabs just sitting on a mattress. Built in the silent era, it had shrouded screen, stars, hush-hush lovers. Now its moldy carpeted 10 stories of posh pads housed hard dope pushers, averaged an OD a week. Big Mike ate a bag of Reds when the heat busted in on the cat across the hall. 16-year-old Maya came to trade sex for drugs, found him face down, cold, cleaned him up, swaddled him in her orange kimono before she dropped a dime to the man, then hitched to the free clinic on Fairfax to get a shot of penicillin for whatever she picked up along with her free love. So it wasn't all fun and games. This poem is kind of the antithesis of that, 18-year-old girl that was witnessing all of that in 1968. This is the coming of a certain age, and it actually has all of the N words are words from a poem, a line from a poem by Mark Jody. This is The Coming of a Certain Age. She becomes more ghost-like each day. Even her footsteps make barely a sound, just this soft patter, almost nothing. A big cat late for the kill, arriving after the delicacies, the heart, breasts, and thighs are gone, leaving only bones to content her. She sees herself consisting not of flesh and frame, but layer upon layer of memory, the strata of time upon time, an airy, eccentric body near to undetectable, a wraith lacking vital shine. Unlike her blossoming days, she'd enter a room and the temperature would rise. Then she was tomorrow's candle, impatient for a match, impatient to dust off the stars within her and emit a light that flares into the little known, the unnameable, into any tomorrow. Now, taking in a breath, she lets out something like a sigh, sending not a prayer or demand, more a reconciliation up toward the heaven, whatever that might be. A warm exhale of hopes and defeats, as though they were bouquets tossed by a bride. She throws another and another, free of expectations, the light within her igniting the air. So poets, like actors and people in the industry, always are writing poems or screenplays about the process, and this is about the process of making poetry. This is called the greater part of shiver. Not just in winter, in French, hiver, the greater part of shiver, when the cold won't let me sleep and an open parenthesis moon punctuates the night, holds it just for the length of a sigh, though morning is restless to erase the signature of night. But anytime I can't tell south from west, have written myself into a corner again, yellows and greens layered on fingers splashing the keyboard. Then shall I write the crying woman, ravenous and wild-eyed, stop her from filling her pockets with stones, or let her kill her lover, lift the lid of her darkness as though I were Pandora, let in the light, la lumière, because, as they say, even a broken clock tells the right time twice a day. The amaryllis still blooms, star-like and blood red. So I just got back from Paris. I'm still a little jet lagged and a little stupid from NyQuil from my cold, but I'm going to read a few Paris poems. I am losing my vision. I identify as partially sighted, and it does continue to degenerate, but this is, so night can be difficult. This is called Lautrec at night. The Montmartre night is lost on me. She holds me at arm's length. Coupled with my own failing sight, I become immobilized when light dims, nonplussed. I envy the Paris Lautrec knew. I could have been one of his Parisians. I'd be on Lautrec's arm, no stranger to shortcomings. He'd guide me gently through poorly lit places, rickety stairs, mottled conversations, show me the life he sketched in notebooks, scribbled on the backs of posters, outlined in his dreams. He'd take me into the eye of the hurricane, the quiet moment in a room packed to the beams, stinking of sweat, drink, dancers holding edges of petticoats, kicking up heels in a frenzy, glassware be damned, all those silk top hats, all that cleavage, where everyone wants something and only the lucky few want what they can have. Some lean their heads upon their hands and watch. The dancer with her stocking rolled below her knee, I'll call her Clotilde, is on a break. Where does she imagine herself? Caught up in different music? Perhaps she wishes that Lautrec would paint her in the countryside next time, wants to be in a meadow reclining with only a summer shawl between skin and the soft grasses, eyes closed, listening to the quiet language of the wind. The Montmartre night grabs a hold of our coats, wraps her arms around us, whispering that she, night, is the backdrop, foreground, and subject. Reminds us that the brighter things appear, the darker the shadows. So we must always see Paris through the dark filter of her eyes. And in one of my past incarnations, I worked in the record business, and I worked pretty closely with Led Zeppelin and a few other wonderful bands. This is to Robert Plant, written at 81 Rue Pierre Girard, Paris. The French cat's, Isabella the black, stretches rug-like under a chair. Simone the gray perches on the sofa's spine. I stroke her and she becomes a Geiger counter, the uranium not far away. Night arrives in a rush, late for dinner. Allez and d'accord bounce up from the street. I have just painted my nails purple with a purpose. Already little nicks from impatience appear on their slick surface. I should have waited to pet the cat. From the stereo you sing, there is nothing sadder than losing yourself in love. 30 years ago, you saw me dancing with a dangerous boy, a guitarist on tour, still drunk with new success. You shot me a warning glance and later offered, be careful, don't give it all away. I used to think I could make the night catch its breath. I used to think I could shatter glass with my delight, draw love to me like a compass needle to true north. Tonight, I understand that waiting is not doing nothing. One cannot force a cat to do anything. Nail lacquer dries when it dries. And I didn't have a dad until I was 10 years old, when my mother married a wonderful man. So I missed like a decade of fatherhood. This is if Pierre Auguste Renoir were to be my father. I'll be one of the girls reading in a garden, wear elaborate hats, dresses the color of sunshine, skin translucent, sit still, silent in his studio until my giggles escape, distract him. He'll spread his arms, invite me into his lap, stroke my hair, call me Babette. The eyes of the most beautiful faces are always slightly dissimilar, he'll say. The petals of a flower are never identical. He'll send me to the market for oranges, peaches, pastries. I'll carry them home in loosely woven burlap bags, add wisteria cut from our garden, place them on a tray in no particular order. He'll admire their natural symmetry, tell me, you have a gift, because I'm his daughter. And because I'm his daughter, I will have a gift, some small part of him. I will know life without outline, action set in motion by its subject, an absence of black in the shadows. When his hands tire, my small fingers will massage the meat of his aching palms, get lost there, tell his fortune, tell his fortune, tell his fortune. In later years, I'll fasten to his wrist with silken ribbons, brushes he can no longer hold. For now, I'll kiss each knotted knuckle, heal him. When he complains about losing the light, carries me to bed, in his beard, I'll smell turpentine, tobacco, impasto, pastis, look up at the painted stars on the ceiling, call him Papa, close my eyes, dream in color. He will never ask me why the cat has cerise-colored whiskers, and I will never tell him I wonder how it would be if Monsieur Monet were my father. Françoise Gillot was an absolutely amazing woman. She's mostly known for being one of Picasso's muses. She's actually the only one of his muses that left him without being discarded. But she was an artist in her own right. And I think he was rather bitter about the fact that she left him. This is just called Françoise Gillot. It has an epigraph, a quote from her. She says, I told him, Picasso, the principle of the victim and the executioner didn't interest me. I didn't think either of those roles suited me very well. Françoise Gillot. When you left him, he burned everything around you, but you, not burned, found yourself in the desert, as he predicted, the taste of ashes in your mouth. Still, you did not burn. Open umbrella in hand, you chewed prickly pear, stuck out your thumb, got the hell out of there. How did you know that most cactus will kill you? How did you know he would curl up on the hardwood floor, the sweat of fear on his brow, as the light drained from the day, from the room, from his eyes? So one of the things that I love about being a poet is you get to write as if. And you get to write as if with authority. So the next two poems are poems about poets. This one is called When Pushkin Comes to Shovel. His nose and exposed lobes are pink as newborn mice peeking from beneath his silver-tipped fur hat. The snow reaches the tops of his polished boots as he takes the shovel from the frozen coils of my fingers. Thank God you came, I say. If it snows again, I'll be stuck. Though I've only cleared the landing and the steps, he says, come inside, little mother. This snow should live here another day. Or two. Entering the room, he tosses his hat onto the antler on the back of the door as though he lives here, removes his gloves and greatcoat, helps me out of my sweater, orders me sternly, take off absurd shoes. I protest. The storm was sudden, unheard of for July. Sandals are all I have with me. He shrugged. These are mountains. Miracles happen at this altitude. Make God's intended use of it. He kneels, unfastens my ankle straps. His fingers are colder than the Russian winter. He rubs first my left, then my right foot, blowing hot breath onto each purple toe, his hands warming with every sigh. In silence, I put on the kettle, serve him tea in a glass. He pops a sugar cube into his mouth, sips the dark infusion through it, then rolls and lights a cigarette, making intricate rings as he exhales. Mostly to fill the quiet, I ask, shouldn't we write something? Light sparks in his mutton chops as he shakes his head. Writing is like weather. It arrives. You don't make it come. You prepare. Cut wood, stroke fire, stay warm. See which leaf outlasts its season. For a long time, the only sound is the occasional hiccup of floorboards settling. At last I say, there's a deck of cards around here somewhere. And if anyone is familiar with the poet Yesenin, he was a remarkable poet. He was a stunning man. He was married to, oh my goodness, her name goes out. But anyway, he famously committed suicide and left a suicide note with his written in his blood. And anyway, this is Dancing with Yesenin. With him, it's just vodka, 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 all the godforsaken night. He orders me dance alone in the center of the nightclub or with one of his many hooligans. Mayakovsky at least has rhythm, spares my shoes, my dignity, calls me a Gioconda. Yesenin broods, smoke drifts from his lip, lilting upward onto the gold curl at his brow. He is still more beautiful than morning, but dark. Cutting in, he leads me. First, the foxtrot, when my baby smiles at me, then feet stationary, we sway, interlocked. Inevitably, he compares me to Isadora, how she'd move, glide, scarves trailing, more zephyr than flesh, bone, more elusive. She whom he hated loving, he now loves to hate. He presses me tight against his chest, mouth against my neck. Heat radiating with each exhale tells me to love like a carnivore, consume it all, waste nothing in order to keep alive, to breathe, to write. Blood makes the better ink. He is a disappointed seraph, can't, no, won't accept the tarnished, the decay, or that vodka no longer tastes like anything. And I'm going to end with a rather long poem. It's not terribly long, it's just dense. I love noir as a genre in poetry, in fiction, in film. And this is called Angelino's Keep Watching the Detective. Usually set in Los Angeles, featuring a brilliant LA detective, with a tragic past, which makes him a clenched fist that opens just enough to hold our attention. He colors so far outside the lines, he's off the page, off the reservation. So he pretty much stays on the outs with the tight-ass brass. Even with all of his wrong way rubbing, they can't do without him because he's always fucking right. He's got a nose for it, a knack, like magic, can figure out everything except himself, making him hopeless with women who try to cozy up to him or slap him with an injunction. To a soundtrack of cool jazz, which he listens to on vinyl, he quests for the truth with eyes as deep as the Mariana Trench, and as closed-mouthed as he is, he's just as unknowable. It's today's city of angels, as noir as it ever was. The Santa Anas blowing in from the valley, as hot as an alto saxophone, making folks squirrely, on edge, capable of anything. The camera lovingly captures this leviathan of a city, from Topanga with its graying, disappointed former flower children, to Laurel, the residents still impressed with their own hipness, to Nichols, Eaton, Runyon, Beechwood, Benedict canyons. It's every kind of beach and resort, former orange-groved industrial parks, each location inhabited by a type and psyche peculiar to that place, peppered with reminders that without constant tending, it would quickly revert to its true self, a Mars landscape of desert. We see Los Angeles' current crop of privileged rappers, reality stars, politicians, athlete, any A-lister with a fixer, the players and the haters, the regulars surrounding and supporting them. Our detective frequents places where we hang out, or have hung out, or might hang out. The shabby, the happening, and the soon-to-be trending, all filmed with cranes or GoPros, droned over layers, tentacles of freeways. The Sepulveda past, artfully lit, slicked down streets, reflecting super-saturated neon and neon and neon. Even the blight of homeless warrens under the overpasses look habitable. We catch sporadic glimpses of the LA River hobbling along, an oxymoron of a waterway, its bed corseted in concrete, parched as a hangover. Transfixed, we witness our detective's relationship with our city. She is the runaway fiancée, driven by confusion, seduced by a suave celebrity, her goodness just temporarily obscured by bad decisions, ultimately savable. We want him to save her as she leads him through the In-N-Out Burger or Fred Siegel's, Dupar's, the urban light sculpture, places we know serve as an echo, a vestige, evidence. We are here, part of it, even as we sit, watching, remote in hand. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Your poetry is poignant, historical, personal, imaginative, and you tell it in such a vivid, lovely way. You know, I love your poems about the Russian poets and the painters, and the last one, LA. You know, I love, some of the lines, love makes the better ink, if I got it right. And also, I used to think I could make the night catch its breath, but you really take us so many different places externally and in your heart. I have a question I'd like to ask you. When did you write your first poem?
The first poem I remember writing was when I was 18 and I was coming down from acid. It was, and I just wrote a poem to the boy man who later became my husband, my son's father. And it ended with a new day is born. Congratulations, have a cigar. And I've lost that poem, but that was my first poem. And then I stopped writing poetry until the year 2000. And, I wrote other things. I wrote theater. I wrote all kinds of other things, but I had I had followed a different path. And then I started writing in 2000 and I haven't stopped. And then I got my MFA and,
What is it about the poetry form that attracts you to it?
I was like you, I was an actor for a long time, but I did mostly theater. But in order to, even though I wrote a lot of the stuff, you have to mount that. You have to kind of get permission to act. You have to mount a production. You have to get a lighting designer and a stage and everything that goes along with it. And with a poem, you can just write it and take it out and share it with people. It's very immediate, and but it also gives one license to express things that you can't talk about at lunch.
Well, I love your poetry, Elizabeth. You're such a wonderful person, and thank you very much for just such a lovely reading. Our next poet is Lynne Bronstein. Lynne Bronstein is the author of Nasty Girls, 4 Feathers Press, and 4 other books of poetry. She has been published in magazines ranging from Playgirl to Chiron Review, from Lummox to anthologies in England, Ireland, Canada, and India. Her short fiction has appeared in magazines and anthologies, including the crime fiction collection Last Report and Crime Under the Sun, and has been read on National Public Radio. She also writes a column on Facebook called Showbiz Cats. Lynne's poetry is poignant, vulnerable, startlingly true, a compassionate reporter of the soul. Here's a superb poet, Lynne Bronstein.
Oh, hello. The prediction for the weather this week is that we're supposed to have a heat dome. So this is a poem I wrote about one of the occasions when it was very hot in LA, but maybe it gets a little fanciful. Crazy from the heat. Temperature 96 Fahrenheit. 2 men go out to a bar and get very drunk, go home and break all the dishes. One of them beats his wife. Temperature 98 Fahrenheit. 10 car accidents in one day. One dog dies left in a car while her owner is shopping. Temperature 101 Fahrenheit. 10 shootings, 6 stabbings. One small riot by an alt-right group. A dozen arrests. 3 black men shot by white police. 26 rapes. 12 reported cases of domestic abuse. 4 looting incidents. Temperature 106 Fahrenheit. Streets deserted. Koi fish die in outdoor pools. The corn planted in a home garden withers. Inside homes, AC running continuously. Blackouts reported in the evening from too many appliances running at the same time. The rich folks sleep by their pools. The poor folks sleep covered with wet washcloths to cool their bodies. Temperature 118 Fahrenheit. Fires raging in the hills. Ambulance sirens pierce the quiet of the night. Birds sing all night long. Sheltered loners eat ice cream and popsicles and nothing else. 7 elderly people die from heat stroke. 10 employees lose their jobs after fights with the boss. Temperature 72 Fahrenheit. Everyone goes to work again, forgives their loved ones and friends, gets back to what they were doing before the heat wave. When asked how hot it was, some of them say they don't remember, and others say there's no such thing as that kind of heat. Now, I have a noir poem here, too. This poem, called Brutal, is actually about femme fatales in several well-known film noirs, and it begins with a quote from each one of them. Bridget in the Maltese Falcon. I haven't led a good life. I've been bad. Vera, Detour. Life is like a ball game. You got to take a swing at whatever comes along until you find it's the 9th inning. Phyllis, Double Indemnity. All the way to the end of the line. Verna, White Heat. Money's just paper if you don't spend it. Kathy, Out of the Past. I don't want to die. Carmen, The Big Sleep. You're cute. They are hollow, made of lipstick and nicotine. Weathered much hard living when young or received too many sweets and choked on them. Greed, lust, and survival instincts are all they have. Cry no tears of sorrow for ladies of ashen blood. For them, love was a fake machine. They learned to be great actors, divas, able to learn a script, improvise a line, change gears or change their story. No loyalties, no memory of what they said or thought or believed 5 minutes ago. Maybe they were visitors from another world, headless insects that feed and breed, sting and kill, eat their young, eat their mates. While awake, they only know appetite. One wonders what they dream of. The mink-lined subconscious gives them luscious living with no need to pay off in nightmares. The horrors of the metal caps, fatal sparks, and the coarse rope's permanent shape may lie just beneath the surface of sparkling anklets and earrings of jade. When wind scrapes the walls of Tehachapi, Bridget closes her eyes and screams to see the shadow of a falcon always on the wall of her cell. Verna makes a face at the promise of strawberries for dinner in the mess hall, and she stomps her tantrum dance upon the tables. Carmen can't sleep for seeing her own nude body in hundreds of snapshots that can't be paid away in the world beyond. Kathy and Phyllis keep shooting each other instead of their men. And Vera shudders at the sound of telephones and tries in vain to unplug the cord. All are caught up in a gigantic maw that stabs and grinds, inflicting the brutal pain they've conveniently forgotten how to feel. Now I'm going to read a poem from Nasty Girls, which I'm holding up here, and maybe the cover was going to come out backwards, I don't know, but the cover, which my housemate James Everett Jones designed, features photographs and portraits of some of these women in various parts of history who all give us their monologue viewpoints about their lives. I'm going to do one of the ones I don't read as much as some of the others here. This is about Evelyn Nesbit, who many of you may know from the book and movie Ragtime, and another movie called The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing, where she was played by Joan Collins. She was a showgirl and an artist's model who ended up as a showgirl again after her disastrous marriage to a man who was insanely jealous. A poor girl can't be ugly, but I often wish I had been. My face was seen once too often, not to mention the rest of me. I was 12 when an artist first asked me to pose. My beauty could earn me more money than I could ever by clerking at Wanamaker's. I made sure to give my mother hell if she didn't let me continue to pose. She said, just don't let them paint you nude. Of course I did. There's always more money when flesh comes that cheap. The man I loved was Stanny. I loved his size, his burly style, his huge, twirling mustache. Maybe it was indeed that glass of champagne that made the room wobble. I only know I fell for him. He would have been my husband, except he already had a wife. So I married that spoiled rich brat Harry Thaw. He shot my true love, and everyone put the blame on me because I was so beautiful. You never hear of men shooting each other for love of plain girls. Plain girls shoot themselves. I wish I had the strength to do what Lizzie did. She sensibly bowed out of this terrible show, but I had no money. A poor girl can't be too beautiful. No help from the Thaw family. No help from Stanny's folks. No one wanted me except for one reason. They wanted to see the flesh that had caused all the fighting. Temptation made manifest Eve after the expulsion from Eden. I paid my own way, dizzy on vaudeville stages, holding on for literal dear life, that red velvet swing. Click went the cameras as I posed for America's salivating tabloid horde, taking it on the chin for everyone's lust. This is a poem that I have to say, a lot of magazines and anthologies were turning this one down, and maybe they just didn't understand some of the things I talk about here, because it's about my parents' wedding during World War II with the Jewish chaplain at a Florida Army base. It was finally accepted and is going to appear in an anthology in Israel. They understand it there. It's called How My Parents Got Married. My mom ran away. Didn't listen to her mother, who said, he's a stranger. You hardly know him. There's a war on. He'll leave you. My mom left anyway. Fled all the way down to the army base there, St. Augustine. My dad told his company, and they said they'd be glad to hold their bayonets in a ceremonial arch, just like weddings at West Point. But the CO canceled all their leaves except for my father's. My mother showed up in a tailored suit. My father wore his uniform. The Jewish chaplain found the nurse to be a witness. The other witness, Dad's buddy Izzy, was also the best man. There was no chuppah, the ceremonial canopy, but the chaplain and Izzy held the chaplain's talus over my parents' heads. During the ceremony, the talus rose and fell, flopping on my dad and mom's heads. They took their vows with the talus dangling in their faces. There was no one to lift the newly married couple, no one to toast them, no one to sing, no multi-tiered cake. Just two people who'd known each other 3 months and wanted to shore up their love before war and the world could interfere. Their honeymoon was the rest of the weekend at the best hotel in St. Augustine. On Monday, he went back to his base and the upcoming future of Omaha Beach. She went back to the Bronx and the uncertain future of a wartime bride. They were married for 58 years. I'm going to do just one last poem here. And this poem came out of months of inner suffering, conflict, worrying whether I could read anything like this at a poetry reading, because there has been so much polarization about the war in the Middle East. I feel like people think that you're either on one team or the other team, that you can't be on both. There's no other humanistic way to look at any war situation except to realize that there are casualties on both sides. There's genocide on both sides. There's horror on both sides, injustice on both sides. This is called The Tears Run Together. I am weary and cannot bear to stay awake, but the Shekinah pries my eyes open. She tells me to look, and I see a woman veiled, holding a dead child. Cry, she says, for mothers of Gaza. Then she turns my head in another direction, and I see more women, more children, the dead piled upon the lonely bones, the bodies still screaming from the resting out of their souls. Cry, she says, for the mothers of Israel. On the earth, some look away from the dreadful sight, and some make accusations, while others deny that they see anything at all. Does it matter what the reason was for this slaughter? Can our wrath be aimed at only one side? The Shekinah cries at the sight of women handled by brutes until the handling kills them. And the Shekinah howls even louder at those who refuse to believe that what hurts one hurts all. The Shekinah wants us to meet somewhere, reach out and touch. And if we are unable to fully understand, to at least cry together for an unarticulated answer to a crisis that does not need to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. You have such a strength of narrative, and you see things so sharply and precisely, and there's a vibrancy in your writing and also compassion. When did you write your first poem?
Oh, when I was 4 years old, I couldn't even write yet. I made up some sort of ditty about bad children, and my father wrote it down for me. And by the time I was 9, I had enough poems that my father had somebody, the secretary, type them up. And so there was only one copy of this sort of shack book called An Anthology of a 9-Year-Old. And I started getting into it more seriously during my college years, but my college poems terrible. So I've been writing seriously, since the early 70s, published my first chapbook in 1974 with a friend's help. And I've been going at it ever since, although I don't exclusively write poetry, as I am also a journalist and a fiction writer.
What is it that attracts you about the poetry form?
It's a form in which you don't have to worry about the continuity of a 3-act structure or beginning, middle, and there's beginning, middle, and end, but it can be looser than that. It can be a mood. It can be a single moment, or it could be epic poetry that does tell a story. It can capture a lot of different things, and it can be in so many different forms. It can rhyme or not. It can be the form of a sonnet, a villanelle, a ghazal, a limerick. It can be funny or sad, and it can be performed. It's much easier to perform poetry, I think, than to do prose.
Who are some of the poets that influenced you before you started writing poetry in a regular, serious way?
Well, I read Emily Dickinson and Edna St. Vincent Millay early on, and they were my favorites. And then by the time I was 17, I discovered Allen Ginsberg, and that began to change the way I wrote, because I realized I don't have to rhyme. I can be all over the place. The subject matter can be, anything. That kind of radically changed me. And when I came to LA, I was exposed to a lot of LA poets who got me really excited, including Holly Prado and Eloise Klein-Healy and you, and a number of other poets that were in LA at that time. And I continue to keep finding new poets that are interesting.
I love Ginsberg. I always felt he gave us a sense of freedom. And just tell us a little bit about your life. You said you were born in Brooklyn, you lived there, you came to LA. Could you just be a little bit more specific?
Well, I was born in the Bronx, actually, the West Bronx,
okay,
where
Bronx.
Yankee Stadium is. So I lived in Manhattan from the time I was 4, and I came to LA when I was 21 after college. And I started out as a rock journalist in papers like the LA Free Press or the old Phonograph Record magazine. And I got more involved in poetry in the later 70s. I came to Beyond Baroque, got into the open readings there and put out several books. And I got involved on and off in journalism. I was a music journalist again in the late 90s, early 2000s. I wrote for some different newspapers. I've written for newspapers all over the place, big ones like the LA Times and the Washington Post and community newspapers, most recently the Santa Monica Mirror and the Culver City Observer.
Elizabeth, why don't you come on the program and you and I and Lynn can talk? Well, I always remember you at Beyond Broken. Didn't you write for Beachhead sometimes?
Yes, the Free Venice Beachhead. I was part of the Venice Beachhead Collective for a while, and I edited a number of poetry pages. They always have a poetry page every month.
Lynn, why don't you say something about Elizabeth's poetry, and then Elizabeth could say something about your poetry that you each heard today.
I was quite interested in Elizabeth's poems about Paris and her poems about various personages. Well, obviously, as you can tell, I like poems that are persona poems, even if they're about real people. And your takes on some of these poets. Yes, I know about Yesenin, and Isadora Duncan was the famous dancer he was married to. And it was interesting to hear that poem. And I'm sorry that you have a cold from Paris. You know, obviously you got your Paris experience into those poems, and I think there's a lot of imagination in your poems. You know, a lot of memorable lines. But because of the whole hour situation, I know, Harry, you probably wrote the lines down that you liked, and I didn't necessarily write them down, so I'd have to look at them again. But I know you had a lot of really good imagery in there.
Lynn, I just always am such a admirer of your work for many, many years. And I especially loved the poem you wrote about your parents meeting and, you know, right before going off to Normandy, Omaha Beach, and which of course we know the day after tomorrow is the 80th anniversary of that D-Day. And my dad was, he drove landing craft onto the beach at that time. And I did the math, and he was 17 years old, you know, and so I think about our parents' generation and what they, you know, what 17-year-old today is that focused. It's such, but I think your poem was just so beautiful and so beautifully told. I didn't write anything. Usually I write things down in the chat, and I didn't have access to the chat. But yeah, it was just so extraordinary. And I was so sorry you didn't read more. But I would love to hear more of, because it's different reading it on the page and then hearing it in your voice. So I really enjoyed that.
One thing I always loved about Lynn was she's fearless. I mean, she'll take anything on, and she just, you know, snap, crackle, and pop. She just puts it, lays it out there. and she's always done that. I don't know, I met Lynn probably at Beyond Broke, or maybe Stephen Goldman's shows at the Venice Library. And I met Elizabeth, I believe it was the first time at the Academy. And so that's been a while ago, but it's just great. Lynn, why don't you take one poet that you really like and just say a few things about that poet, and then the same with Elizabeth.
Well, I'd like to say something about Emily Dickinson, who I think was the first poet who affected me. Most of her poems are quite short. Some of them are only 8 lines, and they do rhyme. To some people, they may seem very childlike. And maybe her life in some ways was very sheltered and childlike. That's part of the charm. Maybe that's part of the reason why at an early age, I got to like some of these poems. I even took one of her poems and put it to music and made it into a rock song, which maybe on some other occasion I will do. It was a poem that begins, "The first day's night had come, and grateful that a thing so terrible had been endured, I told my soul to sing." So that worked out as a song. And sometimes, although some critics have talked about the sadness in her poems and the worrying about existence, I find a certain cheerfulness and sometimes almost, again, the childlike thing, almost a cartoon-like feeling sometimes, as when she described the bird whose eyes looked like frightened bees, for example. So there's a lot of charm in that. And she's just very quotable. And I think that gave me, along with Edna Millay, who did a lot of very formal things like sonnets, that just gave me a basic feeling that you could be beautiful in poetry. You could reach for the beautiful and also for the pure, the simple, just the joyous.
Well, before Elizabeth says something, you said you could reach for the beautiful. Both of you ladies have reached for and captured the beautiful. So thank you. And you know what? I love Elizabeth. I love Emily D. too. I think her collected poems are 1,789. And I've read them all 4 times out loud. And one couple of things I see in her poetry is strength of line and a use of metaphor. And but I love her too. She's just great. Elizabeth, what would you like to say about one of your poets that you like?
Well, it's, as you know, it's quite a task to choose one, and there's so many like juggling around in my brain right now, and I'm tempted to talk about HD or Cecilia Wallach or W.S. Merwin, but I think one of my biggest influences is Muriel Rukeyser. And especially right now that her US Highway 1, or maybe it was US 1. I'm still stupid from the NyQuil. It was she's so cinematic, and I guess if I had to classify myself, I would say that I'm kind of an imagist in the same way HD was. I don't mean to compare myself to her. I'm just in terms of terminology, but Muriel Rukeyser is so cinematic, and you could easily take her work and turn it into a documentary, and I was so taken with that, and have always been very influenced by that, and the detail of science and specifics, and the more specific something is, the more oddly universal it becomes. So it's always been a big influence.
I love Muriel Rukeyser too. She was close with Anne Sexton. I love both of those poets. And you talked about being specific. Wasn't it Blake who said particulars are geniuses and generalizations are idiots?
Right. That's that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And,
what college did you go to, Lynn?
I went to Fordham Liberal Arts College that was part of the Lincoln Center campus. And they didn't have, it's odd that at the time I went there, they had just started that branch of the college. And although they had Margaret Mead teaching an anthropology class, they didn't really have anybody who was real heavy, well known as a writer in the English department. Like, I can't say that I was exposed to any of the greats while I was there. That happened later on. I never really put much credence into the you are who you studied with thing, though, because you can study the people you like just by reading them, not necessarily taking a class. However, over the years, now, as some other people in LA have become well known for their workshops, I have sometimes taken their workshops. I've taken a couple of Brendan Constantine's workshops. And I highly recommend those because he's not a real critical person. He's very open to a lot of different things, and he comes up with the very cleverest ideas that will stimulate people to write poetry.
Well,
I second that, yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
I was just saying that I second that whenever if I'm like really, really in my own head, I will go to some of Brendan's prompts or write him a note, say help, and and invariably he'll even a word sometimes will take me out of what I'm stuck on brooding over.
Earlier you mentioned Allen Ginsberg, and I remember when I first read Howl, I was late. I'd read Kerouac when I was 17. I didn't get into Ginsberg till I was 21 at college. And some of the words he used in there, I never had seen in a poem before. And it just really opened me up, that freedom. And, you two ladies, you poets are just fabulous. And, you mentioned Brendan, he's great too. And there are so many exciting poets here in Los Angeles, and we've all participated in readings with them or with our others, and we've seen them in readings, and it really is great to live in LA in this time. So we have about a minute left. So would each of you want to just take a little bit of time and just say something that's important to you at this time in poetry?
Sure. It was, I think it's just important to keep writing, to observe, to document. Documentation is one of the responsibilities of the poet. And I also think that when someone writes a good poem, everyone wins. So that's kind of our responsibility to do that.
Well, I'd second that. I just tell everybody to keep writing and to be fearless, as you say I am, as fearless as you can possibly be, and express what you want to express rather than what you think other people want to hear.
I like both of you. Very optimistic, and thank you, Lynne Bronstein and Elizabeth Iannaci. It's just been a wonderful poetry reading today. Thank you for coming on the poetry show here at MPTF. Next week, we have Barbara Crane, Bill Davis, Marie Powell Brown, and Garrett M. Brown celebrating and reading from their new wonderful anthology, 3 Writers, 1 Photographer. And here's our wonderful director, Jennifer Clymer.
Thank you all so much. What a wonderful experience it has been to hear your poetry and feel as if I've woken up from my own acid trip.
It's fun going up, but then you got to be patient coming down.
Thanks, guys. Hopefully we see you back here soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. It's been a real honor. Thank you.